Great. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So, my name is Amanda Forys, and I am the managing partner here at Magnolia Market Access. And for those of you that are joining us for the first time, we have this session every month. It's the fourth Thursday of the month. And the idea is for us to take some time to bring our clients together, or anyone in industry that's interested in coming to learn more about what's going on in our world from a market access perspective, from a policy perspective. We think of market access also from a health economics and real world evidence perspective. So we're kind of a full services shop here. So that's the way we think about market access. And our goal here is to share information, to have discussion, to get discussion from you all. This isn't meant to be a sales presentation. So you're not here to listen to an hour of capabilities. It's here to listen to an hour of what's going on in the world. We'd love to hear from you all. I monitor the chats during the whole call. So if you have any questions or comments that you would like to share with us as we go, please do not hesitate. And actually, we're going to ask today that you do participate with us, because we are still debating what our topic is going to be for February, because there's a lot of stuff going on, and the world is constantly changing. So the one today was kind of easy, right? Let's talk about JP Morgan. Let's talk about what people need to think about in January as that conference just ended. There's been a lot of really interesting developments in the policy world. So that's an easy one for January. But if there's anything that you would like to hear about for February or beyond, I would love for you to chat and send me a chat of some topics of interest. We do have a pretty consistent group of people that join this. And obviously, we want to make your time useful and make sure that we're sharing information that would help you in your jobs. So would love to hear some interaction there. And as I mentioned, we do this every month except November, December, because we're way too busy stuffing our faces for the holidays. So thank you so much for joining. Also, one other thing for all of you that are in the snowpocalypse coming, you can listen to this on repeat all week. We have other recordings on the website. If you have nothing you want to do while you're snowed in, but listen to things about market access, you can visit our website. We'll share the information too after the webinar to review the slides of any of the presentations, and get to know what we've been sharing in the past, and help us think about the future. So I will go ahead, and our MC today is Sean McGonigal, who is going to introduce himself. And I think I've already introduced myself, so we'll let everyone do some intros, and then we'll hop right in.
Yeah, thank you for that, Amanda. So yeah, to get started, I'd love to have Tracy introduce herself first, and then we'd also love to have Jim from TKG Market Access introduce himself as well. Tracy, I think, might be the leader in the clubhouse for the guest appearances on these webinars, but this is Jim's first one. So we'd love to have him introduce himself. But Tracy, we'll let you give a brief intro first, then Jim, and then I'll do myself.
Perfect. Thanks, Sean. Tracy Baroni, Allmon. I'm the Vice President of Health Policy and Market Access at Magnolia Market Access. I have been very privileged to be on several of these since I joined almost 2 years ago. Prior to that, spent a lot of years in industry doing health policy, federal, state, and global.
Great. Thank you, Sean. I'm Jim Coccia. I'm the founding partner of TKG Access. So we're a firm a little bit different. We specialize in essentially embedding leadership in companies, VPs of market access, in companies that are building out their organizations or may have gaps. We step in and offer that leadership. And then we're fortunate enough to partner with great companies like Magnolia to bring in marketing and what have you. So excited to be here today. And I was told by Sean I could have 30 minutes of pitching at the end of this, but apparently not. So, another time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, Jim. Yeah. Maybe we'll have time next time. But yeah, so we can jump in, and I'll give a brief introduction of myself. My name is Sean McGonigal, and I'm a Vice President of Growth/Business Development for Magnolia Market Access. I'm actually a part of our parent company, Medical Knowledge Group. Before we kind of jump into this agenda, I just want to touch on kind of how I've came to MKG and why I've gravitated towards Magnolia Market Access and the market access realm of our industry. Because I joined in November of 2022, and if you can believe it, in August of 2022, the Inflation Reduction Act was signed. So when I came here, I did not know what the IRA stood for. So I quickly got up to speed on that and became very entrenched with Amanda and the Magnolia Market Access team. And 3 years later, I'm still very much entrenched with the team because even though the Inflation Reduction Act has kind of taken a little bit of a backseat to some other things such as MFN and DTP and DTC, it's an ever-evolving door, and that's kind of what the goal of today's webinar is, to kind of give a State of the Union, give a quick couple takeaways from JPM last week. A lot of times, everyone on this call has probably spent the past week or so reading a bunch of takeaways related to mergers and acquisitions, which biotechs are getting acquired, pipeline, what's the future of AI. But for the purpose of today's webinar, we want to really specifically focus on some market access and policy takeaways. So that's what we'll be spending the majority of the time today talking about. I've got a few slides up front here with some screenshots of things that I felt were relevant to today's conversation. But I do want to make sure that this is going to be very conversational, as Amanda mentioned. We'd love for the audience to participate. The three or four of us will be having a lot of conversation. We have a mantra at Magnolia Market Access, try to avoid death by slides at all costs. So I'm happy to report, I think we only have about 14 slides. So we're going to definitely have to really drive home some discussions, but I don't think we're going to have a hard time doing that. So once we go through some of the takeaways and have a little discussion around that, we do have some, we'll go into a little bit of some slides that kind of touch on how can we address some of these takeaways from a market access standpoint, whether you're a biotech, whether you're an investor, or whether you're, BD at a large drug company looking at biotechs to acquire. So what we can see here are just four key takeaways, hammering home that policy and market access is something that is now very, very much in the discussion at JPM. Every year now that you start to see that, from the Inflation Reduction Act introduced a few years ago to now MFN is something that was discussed a lot last week. So no surprise there. I mean, science and innovation will always be what kind of drives our industry forward. But now you're starting to see policy as something that can be pretty influential beyond just the science and the innovation that a lot of the biotechs and large drug companies are on a day-to-day basis introducing to us. So that top left, I'll kind of work clockwise here. Basically, just highlighting there that policy was front and center last week at JPM, amongst some of the other things that are generally been talked about at JPM since it started. Then to the right there, BMS adding products to DTC offering following MFN deal. What I want to call it here is I'm not here to say, a biotech in a phase 1 or phase 2 should be building some sort of DTC platform, but more so that it's something that biotech should be taking into consideration when forecasting or coming up with pricing strategies, because it is something that I'm sure investors will be asking about. Is this some sort of revenue stream or pricing strategy that your biotech can launch with in 5, 6, 7 years? Because you're seeing the success. I know it's the GLP market with Lilly Direct, but I'd like to think that might start to kind of trickle into some other therapeutic areas as well. So that's something that I think is important for us on this call in the market access area and policy to really stay focused on. Then down in the bottom right-hand corner, that's just a screenshot from a small European biotech by the name of Abivax. So when I was doing my homework for today's webinar, I was kind of curious to see what were some of the hot names that you were seeing from biotech landscape last week at JPM. Abivax jumped out at me. I think Revolution Medicine was another one that is potentially being acquired by Merck or whoever the large drug company. And then what I wanted to do was I wanted to see how much. I took a look at Revolution. I took a look at Abivax amongst some other biotechs. I wanted to look through their investor decks to see how much of an emphasis they're putting on market access further in the clinical timeline. And it's pretty small there, but what you can kind of see what I've highlighted there is their commercial roadmap. And one of the first things that you can see is that they are focused on gaining access and formulary access. So those are, I know I have links in here, so this PDF will be up there and you can kind of go through their whole deck, whole investor deck. But it's just showing that the companies that are looking to be acquired, and that's what most biotechs kind of goals and what they're looking to do. it's something that is just slowly. The very first thing they're talking about is access and formulary access. And then they start to talk about the medical communications. And then as it gets closer to launch, some of the more promotional stuff that we generally see. So just another thing just to kind of call out that it is, some biotechs are really starting to focus on that to make themselves look a little bit better to investors. And then the final one is something that was talked about a lot on some of the panels around ex-US pressures and how some of the domestic policies are kind of holding back some of our drug companies, or they feel it's holding them back from an innovation standpoint. I mean, it's very much top of mind, and I know we're starting to conduct some research into that, the long-term effects of maybe some of these policies, but it's something that everyone from the large drug companies, some of the trade associations are starting to focus on to really try and come up with some messaging or communications that might highlight some of the threats that some of these policies might have on future advancements within our science. And then those are the kind of key themes from a policy and overarching. So Amanda, I don't know if you want to go to the next slide. So this was a very specific kind of doubling down on what I just kind of talked about on the previous slide, but this is a very specific ask, and I apologize again, this is a very small, but I'll explain what's on the slides, and the links to the PDFs are on the slide as well. But when I was doing my homework for today's webinar, I wanted to kind of dive into some of the specific presentations at the top 5, 10 drug companies. So J&J was one of the ones that I started with, and unfortunately, they don't have their actual JPM presentation, but they have a transcript of an interview between their CEO and a JP Morgan analyst. So on the left-hand side there, you can see a screenshot from last year's PDF. And I did a quick control F to see how many times the word policy is mentioned during that interview. And to support my hypothesis, it was not mentioned at all, not once. So you fast forward to last week, and the same analyst from JPM is interviewing the same CEO from J&J. And yeah, it's a small number of 4 times policy was mentioned. But if you, down the bottom there is a very, very specific question that the analyst asked the CEO of J&J about policy. And what he kind of reiterates is that they hope the headwinds of 2025 policy that J&J and Merck and a lot of the other drug manufacturers faced is hopefully behind them. Now that that 16 of the 17 have struck deals at MFN deals. So they're hoping that now they can kind of put that in the rearview mirror and kind of advance forward. Time will tell if that is the case, but that's what their hopes are based on the transcripts from this interview.
You ready for me to hop on?
Yep, next slide, please. Yep.
Come on. There we go. I promise I can figure most things out in life, but apparently PowerPoint is eluding me today.
All good, all good. So the previous slide focused on some of the larger drug manufacturers, but I also wanted to do some homework on what were some of the small to mid-sized drug companies talking about last week. And this was one I found pretty interesting. Acadia, not, Abivax size, but still in that small to mid-size. So their CEO, during a presentation or some sort of dialogue or panel discussion, talked about how her, and I believe further in the article, about 10 of her colleagues that are in the small to mid-size are developing a lobbying group to help combat some of the MFN that it doesn't right now. It's the 17 large companies that they identified, but they want to make sure that that does not trickle down into some of the more small to mid-size drug companies. So not only are the big companies talking about it, but even some of those more small to mid-size is something that policy and MFN and other things that are being brought down from the Hill in DC are things that people are having to come up with strategies going to 2026 to combat some of this to make sure they're setting themselves up for success going into 2026 and beyond. So I'll pause there. I know when we did a little bit of these rehearsals, Tracy, I think yesterday you had some thoughts around this. So this would be, I just talked for about 10 minutes straight. So, and I promised that it would be this conversational. So I'll stop here and let you, Tracy, kind of give your thoughts on this, and Amanda or Jim, if you guys want to jump in as well.
I mean, thank you, Sean. I mean, I think that was a really good background and gives us an idea of what people are thinking about big picture. Without going too deeply into MFN, I think that even with the models that have been proposed by CMMI to address a subset of products within Part D and Part B, I think that there are still significant questions around MFN. Why only those 17 big pharmas? How do cash prices really help patients who are insured, whether through Part D or a commercial plan? Is that really what we're asking for? Is a type of point of sale transaction that doesn't count towards your deductible? What do you get in exchange for that? And you layer onto all of that the fact that there now seems to be significant pressure from the administration onto specifically EU countries to increase their drug prices. Well, if the US companies are lowering their prices to ex-US prices, why are we trying to increase the EU prices? So I feel like this is still has a long way to go until we really understand what it means. But I certainly think that Acadia and other companies should be thinking about what happens when it comes to us.
Awesome. Amanda or Jim, do you have anything to add there?
Jim, do you want to go first?
I would, sure, thanks. From my perspective on the whole MFN thing is, I think as Tracy just said, it's wait and see. These are moments where I always like to say, don't freak out, be calm, wait, see, especially if there's a long runway for you toward approval, because these are, and we can talk about the fact that there's many changes that have happened over the years, and we evolve with those. So this is why I understand why people are talking about it, but I think it's a moment to say, okay, now we sit back and listen and see what happens. I think anybody in the policy world would say, and see what happens with the next administration as well. So I always counsel, don't freak out, be calm.
No, very good point. I think too, you've got this situation where, we're seeing what big pharma is doing or companies that are established with brands. And as today, we're kind of focusing more on small biotech companies up and coming. And I completely agree with you. I do think though, it does raise, yes, new administration, we'll see what gets challenged in courts, Globe Guard, what's actually going to end up happening versus where are people going to find loopholes to challenge. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure there on that demonstration project. And also if we're going to see actual legislation around these things and where that could go on the Hill, it's definitely a long game. But where I see some of the biggest thing and a lot of people asking us questions is like, what's the price that we think the market would bear here? How do we consider our ex-US launching plan? I'm not hearing, obviously, I'm not going to launch in the US, since I'm going to launch in the US at the highest point possible, right? That's where we're all going to have to be, the way that our system's set up with the PBMs and all the third-party people sitting in the middle. We're just a high-priced world on pharma with everything happening on the back end. And we'll see what happens with PBM reform, right? This week, that's in the health package. So there's so many moving parts that I think like big pharma is ready to react to. And I think you guys are right. It's telling some of these small companies, like, don't freak out yet. We're going to have to wait and see what happens. But I do think it leads to them of like, when you're doing an original like market environmental scan or, hey, where do we think we could launch? What do we think the potential is? I do think we have to take that step back and say, do we think we'd have to just be a US based product? Or do we think we would have something that could go outside of the US and not, from the pricing and the way we know it's going to be paid outside, what would that mean for us launching in the US? So I don't think you can completely walk away from having to consider that when you're looking at like your forecast or your unmet need and all of those different things when you're these size companies. But I do agree, it's like we're very early on to see if things actually have teeth. And that's where, investors, they ask those questions and you're trying to put good data in front of them about who the need is, right? Who's out there. But I think you really have to put an asterisk by that now and say, completely depending on where we can launch and what country will affect what now. And you raised an interesting thing. Sorry, now I'm going on, but on J&J slide up here, it's, and I know we were just saying, looking at just the policy, right? And looking for the actual word policy, when you actually read like what they're saying and what they're thinking about and the level of detail, you're looking at everyone's buying everybody up, right? They're acquiring other companies. They're having to think about growth here in the US. You're also seeing people thinking, for example, like this is looking at a company moving into like J&J, huge drug company. Tracy, I think you said over $100 billion, right?
By
Revenue.
2030 next
Now
year.
we're looking robotic surgery space, right? So are we finding like new avenues and new places to go? And obviously those are all challenging places for pharma companies or device companies. They have their own reimbursement concerns, but what are we going to see the market evolve? And our company is going to be kind of chasing soccer balls right now and looking at different targets. So I think there's a lot of really interesting things. It's cool to see like companies, as we kind of mentioned, like looking at people forming, we've got a lot of lobbying groups. You've got your pharmas, you've got your bios, you've got your advomeds, you've got all these groups out here. It's nice to see other companies developing those. I do think, and we do a lot of work with large pharma and, a lot of these companies, they are thinking about the small and the big biotech, but I think the more voices in DC that can come in and discuss what the issues are and how it's going to affect all levels of product, the merrier right now. So
Awesome.
I'll get off my soapbox.
No, and I just have a follow-up question, Amanda. We were together last week, and something that we talked about around, Regeneron is the last company to not strike a deal. So I'd love to hear from the panel. Like we talked about this wait and see, and it seems like they are the one company that is practicing what we're trying to preach. So I'd love to hear kind of what are some of the things you think, put yourself in the chief commercial officer, head of market access at Regeneron. What are some of the triggers that you're kind of monitoring moving forward to see if you do strike a deal or you don't?
Yeah. That's a job I'm really glad I don't have right now at any company, right, that had to think about that. And I think, Tracy, you can give some great insights to this. And Jim, obviously, you've talked with a lot of your clients around this. I think the deal, early on, it was tariffs. Then we saw tariffs. Then we saw Globe and Guard. Then we saw Balance. Then we saw Guardian. It's like, what are you getting if you strike a deal now? And are we actually out of Globe and Guard? Like it doesn't say that in the regulation. We're hearing that all over the place. As any of the companies that negotiated deals are not going to have to do these demos. Their drugs are going to be excluded. Is that true? I just don't think we know what they got with the deal. Everything is so quiet right now. And I can't tell you if the companies that did do it, is it, oh, we struck a deal because that's the way the Trump administration likes to announce things, or is it actually going to be something meaningful? Or was it, hey, we came out with a couple products on the market that are all going to go generic in a few years and it doesn't really matter and they'll be direct to consumer, but the price will be here and now people are coming off of insurance to get it. It's so weird. Like, and everyone I think got the pressure. We've seen the companies go one by one, but I just don't think we know what they got for it. So I can see why Regeneron is kind of in a holding pattern while they're trying to figure out what does all this mean, because I think we're all waiting for that. Probably even the companies that made deals are still waiting to find out what the deal is. But Tracy, I think from your years in pharma experience, you could definitely give more insight into that. Is what you think everyone's agreeing to here.
I'm not so sure, and I would actually echo your. I'm glad this isn't a place and a decision I have to make. I I do think that the level of uncertainty around a lot of what the administration has done across the board has to be top of mind for anybody who either has made an agreement or who has not made an agreement. And you have to ask yourself, if you've made an agreement, how solid is it? Does it continue to grow? Do you get what you thought you were getting? Or is there the potential for a lawsuit? And maybe that's what Regeneron's waiting for, is to understand, what do you really get out of these deals? The other question goes back to, what are people going to pay? If you don't believe that your international price is going to allow people to access the drug via a direct to patient program, you're probably better off just waiting to see, what are they going to do to you if you don't come in and make an agreement. And we know that it could be painful. We've seen what happens whenever universities don't make agreements and other people don't make agreements with this administration. And yet, I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and the companies that made agreements clearly know more than we do on this call. And yet, until that's public, I think there's a lot of unknowns that Regeneron may be taking into consideration that we can't even guess.
Good. It's the black box, right? We're supposed to be more
It is.
transparent, but there's the black box there. There's the black box on even the original drug price negotiation. Apparently, we were supposed to pick prices, and then everything comes out from CMS, and it's very not transparent, even during the Biden administration, of how they came up with the final prices that were set there. So it's a time literally of the black box, and all we do all day. And I think I've jokingly said this to a bunch of people, is I literally purchased a magic 8 ball. I don't know if you can see here that I try to guess what's going on pretty much on a weekly basis, where I try to apply my knowledge and skill of years of working in this, but also sometimes you just have to know where does the magic 8 ball lead us. It's very difficult. So what do you think, Jim?
I think that I will say one more thing and then we can move on. If you're a big company, you have a lot of different products and you have a lot of room to play. And I think that's different. That's why a big pharma would say, oh yeah, I'm going to offer you something on something which I'm giving 80% Medicaid rebate on anyway because I'm making no money on it. So, and it's going to go off patent. If you're a smaller company and you don't have all of that room, then I think you have to be very, very careful before you strike any kind of a deal. So let the big pharmas go out there and have the splash, and we don't know what's going to happen, and there's a lot of uncertainty for those guys, but they have room to play with their portfolios. So I think that's a definitely a place where you have to balance the considerations.
Good point.
Awesome. Well, man, if you want to go to the next slide, this is the last takeaway. Getting a bit redundant at this point, but the very last thing I'll mention here is just one of the last things I read through was PitchBook, which I'm sure a lot of people are on the line are familiar with. It's a data set research company that a lot of private equity VC firms use when looking at potentially investing in industry, you name it, but specifically in the biotech space. And what they just talked about, similar to what the CEO from J&J said, and this was the very similar thing. You can go read the whole kind of takeaway that they pulled together. And the first thing is that they have some optimism amid some of the policy scars that they had from 2025. And I mean, you could probably predict some of the other ones around AI and other areas that are talked about ad nauseum. But as I mentioned at the onset was that today we want to focus on policy and market access takeaways from last week. So words of encouragement here. Hopefully going forward, we can start to put some of this stuff behind us, because 2025 was a bit of a unknown kind of challenging year across the industry. So I mean, if you want to go to the next slide, we have a prompt here and we'll start to have some conversation around other stuff or what we just talked about.
Yeah. It's funny to read this from the consulting side too, as I'm looking at this, because we've been around for 4 years, right? And watching our clients and like what they've gone through with like budgets and where they're investing the past few years, it's been really tough layoffs. It's been really crazy. And just the past like 2-3 months, not only is policy, right? Everyone's just really busy and running around with their hair on fire in the policy world, but like companies still have to launch drugs, right? They still have to get products to market. And I am seeing from our world, like more optimism from our clients in terms of just like knowing things have to get done or doing their work and not seeing so many pressures this year. It's almost like everyone kind of took their beatings and now they're like, okay, we still have to move forward and march on. So I definitely have seen this. I don't know, Jim, if like in your world, if you're starting to see some of your clients who may have been a little more scared, realizing they have to march on, where maybe the past couple of years they've been a little bit stricter on where they're spending or where they're putting their efforts.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of people scrubbing their budgets, but also going, but we need to get this done. And so realizing it, you have to actually get on the market, you have to move products, you have to collect the money, you have to do all of those fundamental things. And so I do think it's loosening up a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. All right.
So,
Yes.
yes.
Finally, market access people on this call, all 60 whatever of you right now that have market access in your job title and policy in your title. Our heyday is here, right? Here, finally, everyone's paying attention to us. They still give more money to the brand teams though, but we're finally getting some attention.
I think interesting, Amanda, this question, because our policy and market access is finally at the forefront. I was thinking about Sean's analysis of the J&J speech for policy was talked about 4 times versus last year it wasn't. And I started thinking about the 25 years I've been doing this. And in 2000, there was outpatient prospective payment, and we went from for hospitals, and we went from being paid based on charges to having something which really eliminated profit because it became a prospective payment. In 2002, we went from AWP and all that wonderful way of paying Part B drugs to ASP, and people freaked out and said, "Oh my God, it's going to change our pricing." In 2006, we went to Medicare Part D, and all of a sudden we had a benefit for Medicare beneficiaries, and that changed people's development plans. 2022, we have IRA and price negotiations, and we all started freaking out about, oh my gosh, should I launch an orphan drug and start the clock for that indication, or should I wait for the big indication? Oh, now it's MFM. So I kind of think that we go through these moments where all of a sudden policy and access are critical, and I will bet you at the JPM meetings, any of those years, it was on the front burner, and people got excited about these things and said, what does it mean? I know the price negotiation thing and that which indication do we launch? It was huge for my clients a couple of years ago, and they kept asking, where's the value and what are we going to do? So I think, is it at the forefront? A bit. I think market access and policy kind of quivers up and down over time as these different things come along. I do think it has been over the course of the 25 years on the ascendancy, where people realize it's not just these moments in time that we have to pay attention, but the environment shifted as well, and market access. When I think about that, I think about the economics, the consolidation of the payers, the consolidation of the providers, all of the different emphases that have changed. I think it is now, it is a critical component to commercializing therapies in a way that may have taken a backseat to sales and marketing 20 years ago. So maybe it's the policy pieces that keep popping up and making this more important, or it's other things in the environment like the consolidation of payers and the PBMs and the providers and the rest. So a mix of things, but I do feel like I'm important now, where last time I was like, oh, I'm just this guy who does market access sitting in the corner with a stapler.
What do you think, Tracy? Like, do you think some of these things have been so big that they can't be ignored now, and we're moving to a place where it's always going to be at the forefront?
I mean, I agree with Jim. I think that it's always there, and we always have that element of, oh my God, they did this. Oh my God, they did this. But if you think about it, 10 years ago, we were thinking about copay cards and just at the beginning of copay accumulators, and people thought this was, I mean, we spent lots of money, lots of time, lots of effort trying to explain this to people. This is going to be a big deal because you still had a significant number of uninsured patients. You still had people who were lower income. And yet, compare that to international reference pricing or MFN. And so, for me as a policy person, policy's always there, but the spikes, I think, are potentially more impactful and like the IRA, and unlike the Affordable Care Act. I don't agree that there was a huge negative potential there, but with the IRA, I think that was a wake-up call, and there is huge negative impact. MFN to me is the same, and so here I am waiting for a positive policy bump any day now. I'm sure that will be on its way.
Yes,
Will be
Tracy, I didn't mean
good
to say
news.
that all of these different things were negative. What I was
I think
saying,
most of them are, but
well, I mean, I think no, I would say things like Medicare, having a Medicare drug benefit
oh,
for patients with Medicare Part D, it
yeah,
changed how we think about patients and our development
yeah,
plans, everything in a very positive way. So I just think that, again,
yeah,
all of these policy changes have certainly pros and cons, but it has made the whole idea of access and what it encompasses much more important than it was 25 years ago when we weren't talking about this every day.
agree. Yep.
So before we go to the next section, if it's okay, Sean, I would like to invite everybody, and I know I've look through the attendees, a lot of you come to our webinars every month. Is there something that you're hearing us talk about that's of interest to you that you'd like to see on a future webinar? Like maybe what Tracy was just talking about, like the patient, like what's been positive, what's been out, where does this affect patients? What do they need to think about? We're going to talk a little bit about like DTC, I'm sure this year, right? What's that evolving? Is there anything here that's kind of picking up interest for you that you'd like to learn about on a future webinar? Please feel free to chat the hosts and panelists, or just the hosts, whatever it lets you do, and let me know. Happy to collect insights here from people. So, okay. I can take it from here. I think I've got the next slide to chat through. So we're going to talk a little bit now. So we talked about JPM, like what happened, what did we hear? Now we're going to talk a little bit about what does this actually mean and why is market access important? So we're now talking about it a little bit more, but why and what should we do with it? And this is where I wanted to put this FYI up top because I could not tell you at JP Morgan, I went last year to the meeting, or was not an actual meeting, but you know, all the events. And I talked to probably 10 to 15 different people that said something to me that like literally just crushed my soul. They said, oh yeah, we're not really worried about any market access stuff. We're just a discovery. And I was like, oh my gosh, right? Or I talk to private investors and they say, we're not really worried about anything like market access related. We're just looking at the science right now. And, you know, I get that if you're in the discovery phase, if you're in clinical development, but the thing that I think people are really missing out, and we do a lot of investors come to us and want us to like help them evaluate products and think about the market for products. A lot of things that they, you know, they want like an answer in 3 days and they haven't put, it's like the afterthought of let's do the analysis here and see what this could potentially mean from a market access perspective. And I think it's like a couple things are getting missed. Number one, this sounds terrible, but sometimes if the market's not going to bear it, it doesn't matter how cool the science is, right? Like if you don't have an amazing product that's going to come and bring anything new to market, if your TPP isn't going to get a payer excited or be anything unique to them, or you're just another product, you're not going to see a huge bump, right, in the availability or the people wanting to pick up your product and cover it. So do you even go to that point, right? Or do you focus your clinical development assets and efforts on something else? Do your investors want to invest in something else? So I think that's just the first question of, hey, private equity, hey, biotech investors, are you actually looking at beyond the science of what's going to happen when this product comes to market? And is it something that's viable other than something that sounds like a really neat concept? And I really do understand that the science is important, but that needs to be a key thought. So I think engaging even just a couple payers up front, like quick, if you do a quick market research project, just talking to a couple payers of like, what do we think this product would be? Where do we think the price would be? Where do we see unmet need? What should be something that you focus on, as this first box says here, in your clinical development or the data collection that's going to be meaningful? And this is where I think people don't always come up with clinical trial endpoints that are going, I mean, it's obviously you have certain like reduction in this, you know, reduction in this, increase or decrease mortality, you know, length of stay in hospitalization, right? You get like all these great metrics, which do mean a lot to payers. But are you actually thinking about framing some of those or turning those into the evidence that you're going to be publishing afterward? And I think a lot of smaller companies that don't really have the bandwidth, I can't tell you, and Jim, you probably have a bunch of clients like this, that the person who's on the clinical side right now is acting also as their commercial person and their market access person because they haven't staffed up yet. And they're trying to figure out like, hey, I've got this product, we've got the science, we've got the study. What do we need to do with it? And we're going to bring on those people later, but what should I be doing now? And that's my one of my favorite clients to talk to, because they don't quite know all the commercial stuff they're trying to figure out. They're trying to grasp it and learn, but they don't have the effort or the resources or the funding to put into some of those things that they probably should be doing, like building an evidence plan to make sure that that data is going to be meaningful to the payer, or making sure that you're getting into a couple conferences, or maybe doing an abstract to establish the burden of disease, because maybe it's not really an understood disease, or patients might not be focusing on it. So that's an area that I think people really in that early process are ignoring, either investors looking at products or the companies themselves getting so busy and overwhelmed with the actual science that they're not quite thinking enough on that market access side of what should we be developing early. So I'll pause there to see, Jim, Tracy, if you guys have thoughts on kind of where I think people should be looking kind of earlier on, and what you've seen in your world.
Jim?
Tracy first.
Go ahead.
Totally agree with everything you said, Amanda. The other thing I like to help people understand is what not to do, right? Because sometimes you can look at this stuff and I think people fall in love with their own therapies at some point, especially when they're developing them. And then I have seen people who overemphasize in their development plans some of the things like real world evidence and health economics and things like that, where you're like, okay, now with this therapy, which is going to be X, Y, and Z and unique, and this, and let's start giving a framework. These payers at this time point and what they care about and how this drug is going to be formulated. Sometimes you just don't need to do some of these things, and just helping people understand that so that they don't get all wrapped up um, in I say it this way with small companies, wasting scarce resources. So I think a great example might be ICER. We got super excited about, what is it, 7 or 8 years ago when ICER was making all this noise and how we participate in ICER and what are we going to do because ICER is going to be this boogeyman. And I think people put a lot of emphasis on developing some of this value narrative and data and brought it into some of their development plans, clinical trials. And I think it's kind of it went out with a whimper. We don't talk about ICER anymore. It never had any teeth. So understanding what you've got, what you're going to need, and if there's a gap, fill the gap. But don't overdo it when you have scarce resources and time and people and dollars.
Mhm. Yeah, I know Jim and I have had discussions before, and this comes from a company that does budget impact modeling, right? I
Sorry.
Yeah, no, we both talked about this. I talk clients out of a BIM all the time. And I actually just got an email today of a client wants a BIM. And I'm like, well, let me talk to him first to see if they need it. Because sometimes you need it and sometimes you don't. And sometimes you don't even need it ever, or you should definitely not do it this early, right? It's not, I don't want to sell something that's not going to be useful to a company that has very minimal resources, but a lot of payers don't want to see it. Sometimes you just need a better model or some type of calculator you can put in front of them if you're trying to present some data. I don't think people need to show a 10-year out to a payer that they're curing like world hunger, right? I agree with you. You don't need to overshoot what your product's going to do because you are in love with it. I think that's a great way to say it. And overpromise what a product's going to do. And a payer doesn't always want to see like a 10 or 20 year. I mean, most of their patients aren't even in their plan that long. So I agree with you. It's like don't overdevelop or don't overcreate. But I think getting 6 to 8 payers on a call and reviewing a TPP is a great idea, just to see what do we think this product's actually capable of and what would be meaningful so you can develop your endpoints. Or have we really understood, is there enough evidence out there? We synthesize the evidence to determine what the true burden of disease is. So I completely agree with you on that. It's like you've got scarce resources. Don't just always put it into, necessarily a tool that you don't need. So completely agree with that. And I can go to the next slide too. I think that, oh, actually, I might have totally screwed up. Sorry, I'm going to come back to that slide. This one, I was thinking through like, where should you think about market access? And if you notice, like we've got like the discovery, the clinical trials in the middle, the pre-launch, the launch, the phase. We don't think like upfront in discovery, it needs to be everything, right? You don't need to do it. But I do think like figuring out who your payers are, figuring out who your patients are, potentially pretty soon during studies, the clinical studies, getting a couple like payer KOLs would be good just to get that engagement along the way. But yeah, completely agree with you. I don't think it has to, you don't have to spend the whole budget on it. But I do think people could start some of this stuff earlier. And Tracy, maybe I know you've been in oncology for years, you've worked in a ton of different disease areas. One of the things that I highlighted on here was kind of looking at health policy advocacy and like what you should be thinking about from like a patient assistance strategy, or should you be getting involved with patient advocacy organizations? Maybe you could talk a little bit about where you've done that like early in your career or early in like a product's development, or maybe you all should have done that, earlier and where you've had struggles. But that's something that I think during like clinical trials, companies should be kind of thinking through who their friends are, and starting to kind of develop those relationships.
I think that's exactly right. And if we just kind of loop back to the previous slide, while science isn't everything, we don't have to go back to it, but science is still important, and moving forward with decisive steps, not putting all your eggs in the third or fourth line basket in oncology and not even starting your first and second line until you get those approvals. These are things that have to go by the wayside, right? Whenever you're running your third line, trials, you should be starting your first and second because by the time you get to third line, there's so many fewer patients. There's so many, there's so much more beat up. They're sicker. They don't respond as well. The adverse events are less tolerable. So the science and how we move that in an expedited manner is important while you're developing your value and access strategy. And to your point, there are patient groups, there are ways to expedite the trials, and you have to have a good internal trial team, right? That understands the molecule, understands the disease state, understands the competitive market in that class, but then also understands market access. And that's one of sometimes the, I think, the loggerheads where they're not worried about market access, but you have to be worried about market access and understanding how many of these patients, third line, would you have been better off if you had gotten to them first line or second line? Sell that to the clinical trial development team, but also be thinking about how are you going to make sure this is affordable to them? What do you have a trial program? Do you have a copay assistance program? Do you have a free drug program? Do you need that? People want to think that to Jim's point, this is the best product. We won't need a free drug program. There are still going to be payers who aren't going to pay, at least not for the first few months, several months, couple years. In oncology, that's less likely, but there are certain hurdles the patients will have to go through. How do you help them through those hurdles? These are the things that, is it working with the office staff? Is it working with the physicians themselves? These are the things that you need to think about early and get insight from the payers, which I know we certainly have the ability to do, but more importantly, companies know payers too. Talk to them as soon as you can.
Jim, do you find that I know you work again with a lot of smaller companies. How are they following this path? Are they way off? Are they doing some of these things? Where do you think they could be better?
I think do most of them follow this path? No. You often find you're 18 months prior to launch and people start asking the questions that, gosh, we wish they had asked a long time ago, where you say, well, could we prove these things out? Well, had you built your clinical trial a little bit differently? Yes, but now no. And you do a lot of catch up. I think it's just the nature of, again, scarce resources. I would love it if people started thinking as early as discovery about some of these things. But, again, we work with very small companies and they do the best, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we say, yeah, having an amazing therapy is what you need. But I guess I like to think about this as taking some of these things in very early, even if it's just a little bit of your time considering it, will pay dividends in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thanks. And I think we have, a really good, Jim, if you want to talk to this slide.
Yeah, this may not be as important a slide, but again, everything I've tried to say throughout the last 45 minutes or so is have balance, right? When you're early in the development, think a little bit. When you're closer to launch, think a lot. When you're a small company and you're worried about things like MFN, worry a little bit, not a lot, because there's other things to worry about. I always like to say just taking a balanced approach is the way to do it, whether it's when you're thinking about how you're going to price your therapy, or, I mean, Tracy just mentioned, patients and how you show up with patients. Everything I like to say should be in balance. Sometimes I put a three-legged stool out there which says commercial, medical, and access, because I think it actually rises to the level access does of those other functions. It's not as subservient to commercial anymore. So with anything, I strive to help people to say, think about it, don't obsess, but think about it and be balanced in your approach from an access perspective, as with all things.
So no, like $500,000 EpiPens is where you're headed here.
Well, in this case, I always like to say, hey, you can have a great market if you sell something for $1 billion, but boy, oh boy, you're going to be hated. And I think listen, a lot of us come from places where we always put the patient at the center of everything we talk about, and it's part of a mantra, patient first. You got to put that in balance as well, because you can do things that are totally patient-centric and never have a business. I like to try to point that out as well. Have balance.
Yeah. I just had a question come in. It was when I had this slide up. It said, what do you think is the biggest, let me like try to rephrase it. Sorry. What do you think is the biggest policy item for this year, like the current biggest policy item, and where should I be paying attention to that? So sounds like they want to know like what's the biggest thing I need to think about like this year and beyond, and like where on this should I be thinking?
Mm.
I mean, I think if you think of the biggest policy issues, if we make the assumption, as dangerous as that is, that MFN is not going to apply to everybody, I think really understanding the federal and state policy actions and what their impact is on your commercial business, right? Just because you didn't get reviewed by a PDAB doesn't mean you might not be impacted. Just because you don't have have an MFN price doesn't mean that you won't get prior authorized in favor of an MFN direct to patient product. I think that the commercial market is viewed a lot of times as standalone. And in this environment, that is, I would argue that's never true, but it is less and less true now. And if you don't have any control over executive orders and models, you need to protect your commercial market.
And do you have one?
I might say it depends. Um, it's a good question. Are you a commercial? Do you have a commercial asset? Are you on the market? Are you pre-commercial? You got a few years down the road. Do you intend to be a US only? Do you intend to be in the rest of the world? Did you intend to launch in Europe first? So I think all of those things suggest to me which policy things I would care about. Because if I'm pre-commercial and I'm 3 or 4 years out and I have no intention of launching anywhere but in the US, okay, then I might not care terribly much about today's policy issues, but I certainly might be worried about tomorrow's. If you're currently on the market and goodness, you've launched in the US and your plan was next Thursday to launch in the EU, I might be really worried right now about things like MFN and pricing. So it's a hard question to answer because it really depends on where you are relative to your development plan and your launch and your commercialization.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, to me, I think everything's just like pricing and forecast. Everything's going to affect your pricing models and your forecasting models. So whether like all the things you just said, if you're going to launch in the US, if you're not going to launch in the US, right? If you're going to price one way for rebating, if you're going to price one way for DTC, if you're going to price one way because you know you're going to get MFN, like there's so many different things. And to me, for like a smaller company or an investor right now, I think there is a step, and I'm going to go back to discovery. I think either discovery phase, you need to just have some caveats to your forecast of what you think the market will bear for your product and how many people you think will access it early on, just to understand your landscape, just to know what you're working in. Because if you don't, and you're waiting until you're all the way and you've invested in these trials, just to even know the possibilities, to even know if enough patients would be able to access your medicine given the issues, right? I still think just that little scan up front to me is important. And I think everything links back to, no matter all the things we've talked about at the end of the day, it's literally about who's going to get access to the product and how much people are going to pay for it. And I think those are things that just a preliminary, even if you're looking at competitor products, what your competitors are doing to adjust in this market that you'd be coming out against, just understanding that landscape, I think would be really helpful. Looking at the shareholder reports of your competitor products and see what they're putting out or different things that they're projecting to happen, I think is a good place to even start, just to get yourself a little bit of your head wrapped around that. And that message from me is going to my client who is at that tiny company, who's the clinical person that literally just got handed commercial responsibilities and has no clue what the heck they're doing. Getting on the phone with me, who has no clue what the heck they're doing with all their scientific stuff. I would say that's my piece of advice. So, okay. I think we have a few moments for final thoughts. Please feel free to put other questions in. Don't be shy. We're all chatty Cathys, so we're happy to talk here. But yeah, I think we've kind of got some of these things kind of in the middle. I guess that person, something that could happen in 2026. What do we think some of the threats are? If you have a piece of advice, Tracy, I'll start with you. If you want to get to one of these questions, if you have a piece of advice or something people should be looking out for.
I feel like I've given enough advice. I would like to say one of the biggest threats I think that we haven't talked about and that we could certainly talk about at a later date is changes at the FDA, whether it's changes in staffing, changes in processes, the new product vouchers, the selling of the new product vouchers, the changes in complete response letters. FDA has been functioning for the industry quite well for the past several years, thanks in part to PDUFA. Oh, wait, and PDUFA reauthorization is up. So I think continuing to innovate with safe and effective products has to be the goal. And all the changes at the FDA may make that a challenge.
Jim?
If I was going to give advice to either an investor or a biotech, it's be able to answer 2 or 3 fundamental questions. So if you are asked about market access, know your payer mix. Say, oh yes, I understand that 50% of my market's Medicare and 30% is commercial and 20% is Medicaid, and I understand that based on those things, X, Y, and Z. Being able to answer basic questions like that and have a few talking points, it at least sets you up and differentiates you as having confidence and understanding, and at least you're paying attention to it. So I like to, working with small companies, help them with some basic FAQs, answer those questions. It does lead to more questions, but it actually is a way of at least saying, hey, you know something? I am thinking about this because I know it's important. So small biotechs, especially if you're looking to raise money, fundamentally have a slide which says, I get it, it's important, I know these things, and then move on.
Okay. Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, kind of going back to what one of the first slides I had with the Abavax example, just reiterating, taking a page out of their playbook and making sure, I mean, I'm pretty much just, I think I'm stealing Jim's answer, but that's a real world example of just making sure you're having access early on to make sure that as you get closer to launch, it's not something that, oh shoot moment of I wish we had this information. So yeah, I'm kind of repeating everything that everyone said, but just doubling down on that and kind of just going back to, I mean, I'd encourage any small biotech to read through other small biotech's investor presentations to see kind of where they're landing in that area. So that's the one piece of advice I think I'd give. And then also it's easy for me to say, but you talk about scarce resources, but I see all too many times, maybe hiring someone in this area is pushed off a little bit too late, and people don't, you're launching in 2026, so you don't have a value proposition yet. So very fundamental stuff that you should have, but all too often we see it's not there and it does not exist when it needs to. So that's my final piece there. Amanda, I guess you can close us out if you want.
No, I think it's just next year. Expect to see more policy at the forefront that when you control F, you're going to get that word and a million other variations of it, maybe with some expletives in it, but just keep following what's going on in the world and being smart and just looking broader than just US now. I've always focused US. Now we have to think much bigger. That's been my world. And I always say, if I can figure out the US, I think I can retire, right? I think I'll get it all. You can't be that way anymore. We have to think more globally. So I think understanding just every decision that you make and how it's going to affect everywhere is important. And again, even if you're small, that's an important consideration. So, but thank you all so much for your time today. Looking forward to getting some feedback. We'll be sending some emails out to see if you have some topics you'd like to hear us talk about in the future. And we will be announcing our February topic soon. So again, appreciate your attendance and good to see you all. Happy 2026. Stay warm. And if you're on the East Coast, enjoy the snowpocalypse. Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you.